Three houses, same street, same neighborhood, same block where kids rode bikes every summer and neighbors waved good morning over their fences. But here's what nobody knew. Behind three of those doors lived three of the most dangerous men in American criminal history at the same time. Now you might be thinking, okay, that's a coincidence. Maybe a rough neighborhood, maybe a high crime area. It wasn't. This was a tree-lined suburban street, good schools, low crime statistics, the kind of place people moved to escape danger. But here's where it gets strange. Not one neighbor, not one family member, not one law enforcement officer connected the dots for over a decade. And by the time they did, two of the three were already gone. To understand what happened on this street, you need to picture it first. Maple Grove, a quiet suburb sitting 40 minutes outside a mid-sized American city. Population? Just under 12,000 people. The kind of town that shows up in magazine lists titled Best Places to Raise a Family, manicured lawns, corner stores, a diner where everyone knew your order. Residents described it the same way, over and over, in interviews years later. Nothing ever happened here. It was the safest place I ever lived. I never even locked my door. Now, hold on to that image, because in 1987, three men moved onto the same residential street within 18 months of each other. None of them knew each other. None of them were connected. They had different jobs, different routines, different faces. But they shared one thing. Each of them had already killed, and not one of them was finished. But here's what makes this case unlike anything in FBI profiling history. These weren't men hiding in the shadows. They weren't recluses with boarded-up windows and strange hours. They were present. One coached Little League. One organized the neighborhood watch. One brought food to elderly residents on weekends. The monster wasn't hiding from the community. The monster was the community. And that changes everything about how we understand what happened next. Let's start with house number 1. Corner plot, blue shutters, a vegetable garden out front that neighbors still talk about. The man who lived there, we'll call him Subject A, because even today, one related case remains in active litigation. Moved in during the spring of 1987. He was 34, soft-spoken, worked in logistics. His colleagues described him as forgettable, pleasant, but forgettable. The kind of man whose name you'd struggle to recall the moment he left the room. But before he arrived on that street, 3 women in 2 different states had disappeared. The cases were never linked. Different jurisdictions, different victim profiles, different investigating agencies. Therefore, no single detective ever saw the full picture. That's not incompetence. That's a system working in silos. And Subject A knew exactly how to exploit those silos. He had studied them. Because here's something that doesn't get talked about enough in true crime. Some offenders don't just act on impulse. Some of them architect their crimes around the gaps in law enforcement structure. Subject A moved to Maple Grove specifically because it sat on the boundary line of 3 separate county jurisdictions. He had done the research. He had chosen the location deliberately. The vegetable garden was planted within a week of moving in. Now, remember that detail, the garden. We're coming back to it. And when we do, what seemed like the most ordinary thing on that street becomes the most disturbing detail in this entire case. 7 houses down, white fence, a basketball hoop in the driveway. Subject B arrived 14 months after Subject A. On the surface, completely different profile. Loud where Subject A was quiet. Social where Subject A was reserved. The kind of man who remembered everyone's birthday and showed up to every block party with a case of beer. He organized the neighborhood watch program personally, handed out his phone number to every resident on the street. If you ever see anything suspicious, you call me first. People loved him. But 4 years before moving to Maple Grove, Subject B had been questioned. Twice, in connection with a series of violent assaults across 3 neighboring states. Both times, he walked, not because the evidence was weak, because he was extraordinarily good at one specific thing: controlling perception. In both interrogations, detectives later noted the same thing in their reports, independently, without knowing about each other. Subject displayed unusual calm, maintained consistent eye contact, demonstrated apparent concern for victims. And here's where it gets complicated. He was actively useful to law enforcement. He called in tips. He flagged suspicious vehicles. He once helped locate a missing dog that turned out to belong to the sheriff's deputy's family. The deputy invited him to a cookout the following weekend. They became friends, which meant that when the first whispers about strange activity on the street began to circulate, the first person the deputy called for reassurance was Subject B. "You notice anything weird going on around here lately?" "Nothing," he said. "Quietest street in America." This is where the story shifts. Because Subject C, who moved in during the winter of 1988 into a brown brick house directly between the other two, was different in one critical way. He was already being watched, not by local police, not by the FBI, by a single investigator, a retired detective named Howard Callum. Callum had no jurisdiction, no badge, no authority, just an obsession with a case that had officially gone cold, and a name that kept appearing in the margins of every document he reviewed: Subject C. Callum had tracked him across 4 states over 9 years. He had connected 7 incidents that no official agency had ever linked, and in the winter of 1988, following a paper trail of lease agreements and utility registrations, he found him, Maple Grove. Therefore, Callum did what any rational person would do. He went to the police. He thought it was over. It wasn't. Because what Callum didn't know, what nobody knew yet, was that he hadn't just found Subject C, he had found all 3 of them. And the moment he started asking questions in Maple Grove, he made himself visible to men who had spent their entire lives making sure they stayed invisible. For 6 months, nothing moved. Local police reviewed Callum's file, thanked him for his time, and filed it under unsubstantiated. Subject C continued his routine. Subject B continued running the neighborhood watch. Subject A continued tending his garden. And Callum, sitting in a rental car 2 blocks away, watching, started to notice something. The 3 men never spoke to each other directly. No conversations over fences, no nods of acknowledgement, no eye contact at the rare moments they were all outside simultaneously. In a neighborhood where everyone knew everyone, 3 neighbors who appeared to know nothing about each other. But their routines fit together like clockwork. When Subject A was outside, Subject B was not. When Subject C came home, Subject A's lights went off within 4 minutes, without fail. They weren't strangers. Every time, they were coordinating. And that's when Howard Callum realized something that reframed everything he thought he understood about this case. They hadn't ended up on the same street by coincidence. They had chosen this street. 3 separate predators, together. 3 separate histories, 3 separate methods, 1 shared strategy. The quietest street in America wasn't quiet by accident. It had been made that way. It was the garden that broke it open. Remember that detail from the beginning? Subject A's vegetable garden? The one neighbors still talked about years later? In the spring of 1989, a drought hit Maple Grove. Hard. Every lawn on the street turned brown within weeks. Every garden died, except one. Subject A's vegetable garden stayed green, lush, thriving. A neighbor made a joke about it at the time. "Whatever he's using as fertilizer, I want some." Nobody laughed about it later, because when investigators finally executed search warrants on all 3 properties simultaneously in a coordinated operation that Callum had spent 8 months forcing through bureaucratic resistance, what they found beneath that garden ended the case within 48 hours. The full details remain partially sealed, but what was confirmed publicly changed how the FBI trained its field agents for the next decade. 3 men, 1 street, 1 decade, and a quiet suburban neighborhood that had unknowingly provided the perfect cover for the darkest chapter in its county's history. The houses on that street were all sold within a year. New families moved in, new gardens planted, new basketball hoops in new driveways. Howard Callum never returned to law enforcement. He gave 1 interview, 1, and said a single thing that has stayed with people who followed this case ever since.
The scariest part was never what I found, it was how long it had been there.
Because that's the thing about places that feel safe. Safety isn't the absence of danger. Sometimes, it's just the absence of someone looking closely enough. Subject B's neighborhood watch ran without interruption for 4 years. No crime was ever reported on that street, not once. And now you understand why. The quietest street in America was quiet for a reason. It just wasn't the reason anyone thought.